Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today on promoting emotional awareness in children and adolescents, presented by Margarita Arteaga and Morgan Hutchinson. Before I introduce your presenters, just want to go over a few key reminders. We'll have the presentation run until around 2:50, 2:55. We'll have a question and answer session about 5 to 10 minutes at the end. Please remember to mute your sound throughout the whole webinar. If you're comfortable, feel free to turn on your video. And if you have any questions or any comments you would like to input during the question and answer session, please feel free to drop that in the chat box. Like I mentioned, your presenters today are Margarita and Morgan. Margarita is a clinical mental health counseling graduate student who's passionate about working with the BIPOC community and promoting mental health education. Morgan is also a clinical mental health counseling graduate student. Morgan has experience implementing behavioral and mental health supports with children and adolescents. Morgan enjoys working from a trauma-informed lens with individuals of all ages and backgrounds. Welcome, Margarita and Morgan. We're excited to have you here today. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And I'm going to take just a moment, everyone, to get my screen set up. So bear with me for just a moment. Alrighty, can everyone see that okay? Okay, perfect. 1 second. Alrighty, yeah, so as Annie said, I'm Morgan, here to give a little bit of background on me, just finishing up master's in clinical mental health counseling. I was really excited to do this webinar with Margarita today to talk about how caregivers or others who work with children and adolescents can better help promote emotional awareness in the children and adolescents that they work with. I'll turn the time over to Margarita. Margarita, I can't hear you.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. Let me maybe turn on my volume. Maybe I'm being too quiet. Like Morgan said, my name is Margarita. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be here and to have a little time to talk to all of you about this really important topic. Morgan, do you want to go to the next slide? Awesome. So before we get started, we just wanted to touch a little bit on the language that you might find around emotions in literature, or as we're teaching it to the students that we work with. So there's a few different words that you might find. So there is emotional awareness, which is the ability to recognize and make sense of your own and others' emotions. Emotional resiliency, which is the ability to persevere, adapt, and bounce back in the face of stress and adversity. And then finally, emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive and regulate emotion and to act in personally and socially intelligent ways. So the reason that it was important for me and Morgan to kind of outline that we are in our presentation promoting emotional awareness is that instead of resilience and intelligence, is that it puts a lot of pressure to use those words on a child or even a caregiver to be able to teach a skill of being able to bounce back or being able to act in socially appropriate ways. Because what does that really mean? And it's a little bit subjective as well. We're also working with people and students who are of different ethnic backgrounds. So what we're trying to do with this presentation is really just promote emotional awareness that we're all humans experiencing the human experience and human emotions, and however we're able to adapt the skills that we're going to talk about today in a way that works for us is okay, whatever that looks like. So Morgan, can you go to the next slide, please? Awesome. So what are emotions really? I think the definition looks a little bit different for everybody. But for us, it's a way that our body communicates with us and also with others. So our emotions kind of rule the places we go to, the people that we surround ourselves with, the way that we act sometimes. And There's some 3 key elements that we can kind of keep in mind as we're thinking about our emotions, and then also the students that we work with, and for caregivers, their children. So there's the subjective experience. It kind of depends on who you are, your background, your environment. While one child might have fun while learning a new skill and they happen to fall down, it's part of the experience and they may still be having fun. Another child might feel discouraged, angry, or sad, and that's okay. We then have the physiological response, which for some of us, when we get nervous or anxious, we might start to feel warm. We might feel our cheek getting red. For others, our heart starts to pound. So these are just some of the ways our body is trying to communicate with us the type of emotion that we're experiencing. And then there's the behavioral response. How do we choose to react based on these emotions? And that's mainly what we want to focus on, is how can we take the emotions, become aware of them, and then create some coping strategies to navigate how our behavior is afterward. And why is this important? Why does this matter at all? Like I said earlier, emotions can determine the places we choose to go, the activities we engage in, the people we surround ourselves with. So being able to identify the emotions that we're experiencing can help us show compassion and empathy to ourselves and also to others. It can help build self-esteem for the children that we are working with and overall improve quality of life. I'll turn the time over to Morgan.
Alrighty, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some steps to support emotional awareness in children and adolescents in the moment. There's lots of other things that you can do to help support emotional awareness, but this next section is a little geared specifically towards you're working with an adolescent or a child, they're maybe having a hard time or experiencing an emotion, what you can do in the moment to help support them, help them bring awareness to that emotion and help validate the emotion. And so there's kind of 4 steps to this that we're going to talk about. And the first is, first of all, as the person working with the child, we need to recognize the child's emotions. Second, we need to be able to listen empathetically and validate the feeling. A lot of times, we want to help our children or help kids that we're working with fix all of their problems. And sometimes they just need us to listen. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. The third step is kind of helping the child label the emotion, kind of figure out what's going on for themselves and create some vocabulary for what it might be that they're feeling. And then the fourth step is if maybe there's a problem that's around the emotion, meaning that they're experiencing some challenge that created the emotion, if they need some help problem solving and what that might look like in a supporting way. So the first one is recognizing your child's emotions. Now, kids don't always express emotions the exact same way that adults do. Sometimes it's similar, but kids don't have the same verbal capacity to be able to explain exactly what they're feeling. And so they tend to express it a little bit more physically. And that might be as through facial expressions like that pouty lip or those scrunched eyebrows. It could just be body language that they cross their arms, or sometimes when kids feel scared or nervous, they kind of shrink into themselves. Kids also are much more likely to experience somatic symptoms, which is just basically physical manifestations of the emotion or stress. So such as they might be more likely to get stomach aches or headaches when they're experiencing strong emotions. Another way is behavior. So we've all seen working with kids that sometimes they tend to be having a bit of a harder day. Maybe they're fighting with their siblings or peers a little bit more, or they're a lot less talkative that day. It's just there's some kind of behavior shift that is outside of their norm. And then also it can be through play, especially with younger children, imaginative play. So you can watch the way that the kids are playing in imagination and maybe look at the themes that are there. Is there a theme of fear and sadness that maybe they're playing out that relates to their life somehow, or that they're playing out their worries somehow? So you can kind of use these as tools to investigate that there might be something more going on. And so the next step is to listen empathetically and validate the feeling. But we can't listen if our kids don't come and talk to us about the emotions, or if the kids and adolescents we don't work with don't come talk to us. So sometimes we might need to bring it up ourselves. And so this might look like one key thing to keep in mind is, again, kind of looking for those changes in their normal behavior, looking for those clues in body language. And then you can kind of comment on what you notice. And so I have some examples here of, for example, you seem sad today. Is there something on your mind? Or I noticed you've been really quiet since I picked you up from school. Did something happen at school that upset you? Or I noticed your arms are crossed and your body is tense. When my body does that, it usually means something is bothering me. Is there something you're upset about? And so you can kind of just share the things that you're noticing and use it as an opportunity to ask them if there's something more going on that they want to talk about. And then let's see. Okay. So after they we get them talking a little bit, the next part is that we want to reflect or repeat back to them what we heard. So this step is really crucial. Usually, and this isn't even just when kids are talking to us, this might be our normal in every adult relationship. Someone's telling us something they're going through, and we hate to hear they're going through a hard time. So we just jump into fix-it mode, and we want to give them all these different solutions to try out and all this advice about what they can do. And I want you to pause for a moment and think about a time that's happened to you in your life, when you opened up to someone about something hard you were going through, and they immediately just responded with like advice or opinions or their own experience. And reflect for a moment to see if you felt heard or what it was like to go through that experience. And a lot of times we don't feel heard. Sometimes we want the advice, but sometimes we just want a listening ear. And so in order to make kids feel heard, we need to show them that we understand. And so we can do this by reflecting or repeating back to them kind of what we heard. It'll increase also the chance that they're going to come to us again in the future, because they know that we don't necessarily just care about solving their problem. We're also here to listen and to empathize with them. And so there's kind of three main types of reflections that I'm going to go over. So reflecting the content or the essence of the message, maybe reflecting back the feeling that they shared or the feeling that you think might be there, or reflect the meaning, which can be kind of a combination of the feeling and content. And sometimes what's helpful too is to, after you share what your reflection and your summary, kind of checking for accuracy of, did I get that right? Or does that sound like what you shared? Would you change anything? So it can give them an opportunity to let you know if maybe you're not quite getting what they're trying to share with you. So here's an example of a reflection of content, which is basically just the essence or just a summary of what they shared with you. So for example, the parent, picked a child up from school. The child was more quiet than usual. And the parent asked, did something happen today that is bothering you? And maybe the child, says, yeah, Ronnie, Amelia, my friends, they didn't really play with me at recess. They kept running away. And so you just reflect back basically what they said, maybe in their own words or your own words. So the parent might say, oh, they kept running away when you wanted to play with them. I think that would make me upset too. And that could just be a connection piece there at the end. The main content is that first sentence. So that's one idea, is you're basically just sharing back with them exactly what you heard, to let them know, like, I heard you, I'm listening, I'm here. And the second is reflection of feeling. So this can be really useful. Sometimes kids will, especially older kids, might specifically tell you the feeling that they're having of, I feel sad, or I felt angry when this happened. And maybe sometimes not. Younger kids might not have the words. So reflecting feeling can be a great way to validate the feeling that they did share with you, or you can tentatively offer a possible underlying feeling that might be there. And this might be particularly useful for younger kids who maybe don't have the language to assign a feeling to what they're experiencing. So here's an example with a teen. Maybe the teen wants to skip school on Friday, and the dad responds, well, you usually enjoy school on Friday. Is there a reason you're wanting to skip? And the teen says, we have a huge test in algebra, and I know I'm going to fail it. I also have a massive paper due that day, and I'm not even close to finishing. And the dad kind of reflects back, that's a lot to do in 1 week. It seems you are feeling overwhelmed and even a little anxious about it all. So there's the reflection of the feeling. And the teen feels heard and says, yeah, I just don't know how I'm going to do it all. And that's not maybe the end of the conversation, but it would create an opportunity to let the teen know that you hear them and you're listening. and you understand that emotion that is there and how difficult that is for them. Okay, and then the next part is so reflection of meaning. So reflection of meaning can kind of mean you're reflecting the content and you're reflecting a feeling. So basically just a summary and the feeling with it. So this might mean that the caregiver says, oh, that's not what we meant to do. There we go. I notice your arms are crossed and your body is tense. Is there something that you're upset about? Do you want to talk about it? And the child says, I can't find my favorite stuffed animal. I've looked everywhere and I can't find him. I really wanted to bring him to show and tell tomorrow. And the caregiver might tentatively suggest a feeling here of you feel sad because you can't find your favorite stuffed animal for show and tell tomorrow. Is that right? So checking for accuracy right there. And the child might respond, yeah, I really wanted to bring him. And so something to kind of highlight is I am sharing these different types of reflection, but when you're listening to your child, you don't have to scan in your brain, okay, do I need to do a reflection of meaning, a reflection of content or feeling? It kind of just depends on the moment. There's no wrong or right way to do it. These are just different examples of some of the things that you might highlight or reflect back to kind of show that you're listening to your child. 1 second. Okay. Okay, sorry, 1 second, getting resettled here. Okay, so the next step would be to help the child label their emotion. So, there we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. So you want to be able to help them maybe label the emotion that they're feeling, because again, even as adults, we don't always know what we're feeling. It can be difficult to create the language, and children and adolescents might struggle with this even more. And so when we're helping them label their emotion, this isn't us telling them how they should feel. It's more so just helping provide some tentative suggestions of emotions that they might be feeling, and then exploring it together to kind of figure out what the emotion might be. And so for younger children, you really might have to provide that vocabulary. They don't always know all the different types of emotions. And so, for example, maybe the child is crying and the adult says, you feel very sad, don't you? Or I bet that made you angry. So the kid didn't say anything about the emotion, but the adult is kind of offering the language and checking in to see if that's what the child is experiencing. And then older children may need help, but you can also just ask them of how does that make you feel? Or what emotion do you think that is? And maybe you need to provide some suggestions and then you can explore it together. So one thing I love too is that here's an example of sometimes it can be really helpful to have some kind of chart that you can explore together that lists the different types of emotions that are available or that we can experience so that you can sit down and explore it together. And so here's one that I really love, more so for younger children, because the complexity of the chart is going to depend on the age and developmental stage of the child that you're working with. So if we're working with really young children, we're going to want to keep it simple. We don't want to add too many different emotions because they're still just trying to figure out the basics there. And I really love the movie Inside Out because I think it does a really phenomenal job of kind of demonstrating the different types of basic emotions that people can experience and how they interact. And so you could have some kind of printout like this and watch the movie with your child and talk about the emotions and what they might be like. And then when they're having a hard time, maybe pulling it out or just talking about it of, who do you think is visiting you right now? Do you think it's fear or do you think it's anger? And kind of just having a conversation about that, or what do you think they're saying right now? And so you can kind of just use this really great tool to do so. Some other examples for preschool could include, again, as they get a little bit older, maybe towards the 5 range, you could add some more emotions. And a lot of kids are very well aware of emojis these days, and emojis are very expressive. So you could have some type of emoji chart with a few basic emotions that the child could point to, or some that also represents other children, not just emojis. So again, to summarize with preschool, you're going to want to keep it pretty simple. You don't want to have too many emotions. And again, that's going to depend too on the developmental stage and where your child is at specifically. So as kids get a little bit older, you might be able to add a little bit more to the chart that you have. So maybe you want to stick with the theme of inside out, but now you can maybe have a chart that identifies what are some of the different types of emotions that fall underneath those main categories. So for example, with sadness, we don't just have sad, maybe it's bored or sleepy or unhappy, feeling ignored or lonely. There's other emotions that are there as well. And so you might be able to explore some of the other emotions that fall underneath that main category. Or you could have a little bit more of expanded of an emoji emotion chart as well. There's hundreds of emojis you can create your own and add as many as you want that feels relevant to you and your child or the children that you work with. Okay, and so as kids get older into adolescence and even into adulthood, we can kind of work with things that are a little bit more complex, really exploring the idea that emotions aren't always simple and we don't always just experience one emotion. Sometimes it is a combination of emotions. I might be angry and I might also feel a little bit sad, or I'm angry, but I have some underlying feelings that are feeding into that anger. It's not just angry. And so I really love these emotion wheels because they can kind of help us dive a little bit deeper. So here on the left, you see we have a little bit one. It's a little bit more simple than the one on the right. Let's talk about that one for a moment. So in the middle, where the faces are, we have kind of some of the basic emotions of love, happiness, sadness, surprise, anger, disgust. And then as you expand out into the coordinated color, you'll see some of the other underlying emotions that might fall into that. And so you could sit down and help the child. What you would want to do is start with the middle. Okay, let's identify what we might be feeling here in the middle. Okay, I'm experiencing anger. Okay, let's look at the anger section. What are these? Here's some emotions over here. Do you feel like any of these might be part of your anger? Oh yeah, I was feeling really frustrated with trying to finish that assignment and I couldn't get it to work with the computer. And so you can kind of start to explore the idea that emotions aren't always just they're not always just one emotion. It can also be different emotions feeding into one another. And then you see on the right, we have one that also has even more layers. And again, you would start with the middle. And let's say I was feeling happy. So, okay, I'm feeling happy. Now let me look at that second row. I feel proud. Okay, and then following the section that leads to proud, there's two words there, successful and confident. And maybe exploring, do either of those feel like they apply to you? And so it really starts to help you understand the depth of emotions. So it can be a really great tool to work with older kids. The one on the right, you might want to start with one that's a little bit more simple on the left, because the one on the right can sometimes be overwhelming for people who don't have a lot of experience with their emotions. Okay, another really great thing is to help kids identify emotions in the body. Because kind of as Margarita mentioned, emotions are our body's way of communicating to us about our current experience and about our needs. So it's important to have a conversation about this before you're in the moment, but you can talk to the students that you work with or your kids or whatever children or adolescents that you're working with about how we feel and experience emotions in our body. And so you can give some examples of, I feel fear in my stomach, or I feel sadness as a weight in my chest, or I get butterflies in my stomach when I'm nervous. And so we can help kids to start to recognize that the emotions show up maybe in different parts of their body as different sensations. You can also have a chart, like an outline of a body that I have there on the right, and have kids point to the area that they're feeling the emotions, that they could color it and help them and help you identify where they might be feeling that emotion in their body. And so it could be really easy, such as, oh, that made you sad when your brother took your toy and you're feeling sad right now. Checking in with your body, where do you feel that sadness in your body? And so we're kind of just creating another level of emotional awareness that emotions happen in the body. And if we listen to our emotions, we're better able to take care of our needs. Okay, so next step would be to help the child problem solve if there's something that needs to be solved. But I want to pause before we jump into problem solving is maybe first, after we listen, we validate, we help them identify the emotion, maybe we just ask if they want to solve the problem together. Sometimes there might not be a problem to solve, or they don't feel like they need support with that. It's just they're needing someone to listen, someone to hear, and someone to validate. So it never hurts to ask if they want to solve the problem together or to explore it together. Because like I said, some kids just need a listening ear. But if we are going to problem solve together, you can start, here's kind of some of the basic steps that we're going to get into. So the first is to kind of set limits on behavior. Basically, what are appropriate ways to express emotions? Emotions are not bad. No emotion is bad, but maybe sometimes the way we express them is appropriate or not. And then the second step would be, we're going to identify the goals. What are you wanting to happen differently next time in that situation that upset you? The third is you're going to explore possible solutions together and then evaluate those potential solutions. What are the pros and cons? And then help the child choose a solution. So to dive into that a little bit more, so setting limits on behavior. What's so important about this step is that we're highlighting that feelings are not the problem. A lot of times we label feelings or emotions as, oh, good emotions or bad emotions. There's really no good or bad emotions. Some are more pleasant than others. But we're wanting to highlight that the feeling that they had is not the problem, but maybe their misbehavior or the way they chose to express the feeling is. So if we haven't already, we're going to help them kind of label the emotion that was behind the problem behavior or the unacceptable behavior. And so we can clearly explain that the behavior they chose to express that emotion is not appropriate. For example, someone taking my toy would have made me mad too, but hitting is not okay. And so we're validating that, yes, the anger, I would feel that too, and that makes sense, but that's not the best way to express it. And then the second part was to identify goals. Basically, I've mentioned this already, is what would your child like to have to happen? So, or to happen differently. So for example, they are having a hard time with their friend at school. Well, what would they like to happen differently? Do they want to brainstorm ways to strengthen the friendship? Do they want to brainstorm ways to make new friends? So kind of getting a feel for what it is that they want to happen differently next time. But sometimes there's not a solution when it comes to emotions. For example, they lost their pet. That's just sad and something that happens and we can't fix it. And so maybe part of it is just learning to accept the loss, to find comfort, or just to be able to sit with that emotion and allow it to be there. Okay. So almost done with this section. So jumping into thinking of possible solutions. So this might look a little bit different for younger children or older children. Kids under the age of 10, around that age, they tend to struggle with abstract thinking, which means that they're going to have a hard time creating this huge list of all these different solutions that they can try out. And another thing is they might want to try out a solution as soon as they think of it, because they're kind of best at holding one thing in their mind at a time. So that might mean that you might come up with a solution together and then they immediately want to try it out. And as long as it's not harmful, there's no harm in letting them try one after another to go explore, to figure it out, and then come back and try the next one if it didn't work. Because that way we can encourage their independence and not dismiss their enthusiasm. Again, that also depends on how much time you have in the situation. You might not always have time to keep trying out solution after solution after solution. So you can provide more guidance if necessary. Sometimes role playing or fantasy play to try out ideas or solutions. For example, child knows or wants to go apologize to their sibling, but they're not sure exactly what to say or how to do it. And so you could role play that together. Or in fantasy play, one example I heard is having puppets that kind of act out the different solutions. And then maybe you give a solution of, okay, you could, next time, you could hit your brother, or you could talk to them, and maybe the puppets kind of act that out, and you can show what might be some of the negative consequences of that. Again, that's for like the really young children that might work best. But and then working with older children, you can kind of use a little bit more of a traditional brainstorming process with this. Basically coming up with a list. And one fun way to do it is to come up with every solution that you can think of. Doesn't matter how wild or silly they are, put it on the list, and we're just right now we're brainstorming, and we weed it out later. And if you're writing down their ideas, it kind of shows that you're taking them seriously, even if even the silly ones. And so yeah, just really brainstorming all the different possible solutions here. So yeah, that's the overview of how to help them think of possible solutions. And I'm going to turn the time over to Margarita for the next part.
Thank you, Morgan. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So once you've helped your child or student navigate how to think about some possible solutions to solve their whatever issue is coming up, it's going to be really important to validate each solution that they came up with. So going through every single one, validating that you appreciate them taking the time to come up with these solutions, and reviewing the pros and cons, helping them come up with whatever it is that they're going to choose to act on. This is a good opportunity to evaluate family values if you are a caregiver, asking them questions like, is this solution fair? Who is it fair to? Will it work? What type of outcome are you hoping to get? And is this likely to achieve this outcome? Is it safe? Is it going to be safe not only for the child, but for whoever else is involved in the problem solving process? How is it going to make the other person feel? And then also, how is it going to make you feel as you carry out this plan? Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. So once you've taken some time to kind of review those pros and cons, really listening and validating what's coming up for them, is encouraging them to pick a solution. Sometimes it might be our natural pull to say, I think you should choose this solution just based on your experience as an adult, but it's really important and empowering for them if you allow them to have the opportunity to choose them on their own, especially some solutions that are not going to work. If they're ultimately going to be harmless, it's going to be a good learning opportunity for the child to kind of try out what value did they choose to attach to the problem solving choice they made, and what's going to happen afterward, what worked, what didn't work. Once they have a solution, help them create a plan on carrying them out. And then also provide a space for them to know if this doesn't carry out the way you wanted to, that's okay. It happens to us as adults, letting them know and humanize that choosing things that don't work is normal. And it can also be a really good opportunity to come together and model what do you do when you choose something that doesn't turn out the way you wanted to, and kind of how do we manage the emotions that come in the aftermath of that. It'll be the next one, please. Awesome. So now we're going to talk a little bit about navigating blocks. That all sounds really great and wonderful, but the reality is that it's, having empathy and listening to your child is not always going to yield a very smooth conversation. Sometimes they're in the middle of a tantrum, or maybe they're just very overwhelmed by the emotion they're experiencing. They don't want to hear, hey, let's talk about your emotions. And that's okay. It's completely normal and part of caregiving. So in order to navigate some of these blocks, we want to talk to you about some strategies that you can use to kind of make it so that your child doesn't get to that place where they're so overwhelmed and so overcome by emotion that they're not able to have this conversation. So important to avoid making comments that elicit stress-related hormones. So things like criticism, like mocking, humiliation. Oftentimes we try to help the situation by making jokes or like trying to make the child laugh, but sometimes we inadvertently might hurt their feelings. So for example, laughing when they throw a tantrum, or when a child is crying about something you don't think is that big of a deal and saying something like, don't be such a baby, you're fine, this is not a big deal. That doesn't ultimately help the child feel like their emotion is being validated. And a lot of the time, these comments are not made intentionally. We're well-intentioned in our conversations, but they slip out. So just trying to be intentional about avoiding these types of comments. And instead, being very specific about the type of praise you're giving them when you're interacting with them. So for example, if you're teaching a child to ride a bike, that can come with a lot of ups and downs and emotions, whatever is going on. So saying things like, you're doing so well timing your turns on your bike, instead of saying, I can't believe you fell. Didn't you see that we were going to turn right here? Because then it puts the blame on them that they did something wrong when really they're just learning a skill. Another example could be, good job pressing on the brake when you need to. The reason that this is really important is because the words that you choose to communicate with your child about their emotion and their experience can really affect their self-confidence. And as parents, caregivers, or even as we interact with children in other capacities in schools, we have the tendency as adults to kind of redirect them because we know the way some things work, and we tend to be like, this is the way you're supposed to do it. But we're not allowing them to have the experience of learning on their own, and then also understanding that when they are learning on their own and experiencing emotions, that this is okay. And when they come up to other experiences in the future as they grow up, they know that making mistakes and experiencing those emotions are okay as well. Another thing that's important here is knowing that whatever words you use to describe the child, so saying things like, you're very hyperactive, or, oh, you're really sensitive. Those types of labels stick with the child for a really long time and into adulthood and maybe forever. So it's important to kind of notice and be careful about the words that you're using. Can go to the next one. So some other strategies to avoid these blocks. Avoid pushing your idea of the right way into the child. So some examples of that is, because you ate too fast, now you have a stomach ache. I told you not to do that. So instead, having a little bit more empathy and, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that you have a stomach ache. Why do you think that happened? And kind of allowing them to figure out on their own, probably because I ate too fast and then I went to play around, wasn't really paying attention to the time. Maybe they can't come up with that conceptualization on their own, but at least you're providing a space for them to, you're not just pushing your idea of the right way onto them. And additionally, always addressing the underlying feeling before redirecting or addressing behavior. So the example I mentioned before of like saying, I'm sorry you have a stomach ache. What is that like for you? Before saying, next time, perhaps, you want to take a little bit of a pause before you go out and run around, or before you eat too fast. There's a lot of research and literature that supports the idea that if you're able to address the feeling or emotion that's coming up before even mentioning the behavior, it allows for the child to be able to process whatever happened a lot better. Okay. Another skill is becoming aware of what may trigger the child throughout their day. This is more so for caregivers that are able to spend a prolonged amount of time with the child. So paying attention to kind of their daily habits, their routines. When do they seem to be overcome by their emotions? Is it a particular place? When they leave one place and they go to another, where they become more emotion prone? Is it when they enter a space that has a lot of people that they are not familiar with and that becomes overwhelming? Is it when you quickly take them from the car to a crowded room? So paying attention to those patterns, and then be able to have a conversation with the child beforehand. So for example, saying something like, hey, my friend who you haven't met before is going to come over. What do you think about that? The child might say something like, oh, I don't know how I feel about being around a new person. And that's okay. Saying, okay, yeah, I feel nervous when I meet a new person too. What can we do to make you feel better? What do you want to do right now? So paying attention to kind of those cues and triggers, and helping the child navigate everyday life a little bit easier. Okay. So listening to hear and not to respond. We see this a lot in adult relationships as well. If you think about some of the relationships you have, romantic or not, when often, I think Morgan mentioned this earlier, you're kind of venting about something and someone responds with some advice or their own experience, and that's not necessarily what you want to hear. So sometimes if a child is being open and expressing these emotions to you, I think as caregivers and as parents, often we just want to let me fix whatever's wrong. But sometimes they just want to vent and have a space for that. And then also our problem solving skills aren't always going to work with them. Something also to note here with listening to them and not putting our own input into their experience is that some parents have the tendency to not give their child choices, and that kind of takes away some of that autonomy, self-confidence, and ability to come up with ways to navigate those emotions on their own. So it's really important to empower them and allow them to make their own choices, whatever way that looks like, and practice those. So next time a child wants to make a request and like maybe what they want to eat, what they want to wear, kind of let them explore that so that they can develop a better sense of individuality. Yeah, I think go to the next one. Awesome. We're almost done with these strategies. So avoid siding with other adults right away. So a common example that we might experience with this strategy is maybe getting a call from a teacher or a counselor saying, oh, you know, so-and-so did this, they misbehaved in school. And then when the child comes home or gets off from school saying, oh, your teacher said you did this, like, why did you do that? So instead of doing that, giving them space to listen to what their experience was. So I got a call from your teacher today. What happened today? Listening to their story, not putting the blame on them. And if they experienced an emotion that caused them to misbehave, maybe anger, working with them to ask, like, next time we feel angry, what can we do? What are other options we have so that you don't get in trouble in school next time? Being honest, I think most of us know that the students and children we're around, they know when we're not being genuine. So you can say something like, oh, that sounds really hard. But if you don't actually think that, they're not going to take it to heart. So be honest about the experience. If you're feeling frustrated yourself, it's okay to model that and say, I feel kind of frustrated right now about this. Let them witness that it's okay to have that emotion while you're talking, and they can have that emotion too. And of course, be patient, because again, this sounds all great and dandy from a presentation, but actually having these conversations is really hard. But I think as long as you're being intentional and compassionate and empathetic with yourself and the child, then they can be really successful. There's one more, I believe, Morgan. Yes, so the last thing kind of want to mention with this is just being aware of your power as a caregiver, or if you're in school spaces with children. A lot of times, and maybe many of you have experiences where you remember having an interaction with an adult when you were a kid and it sticks with you, maybe not the specific conversation, but maybe the words that were used, the way it made you feel. So pay attention to some of these questions, like in what ways are my words and interactions sticking with the child? How do I want them to remember this experience? And what do I want them to remember about this? Next one. Okay. So when is it not a good idea to use these strategies to navigate these blocks? First, when you're pressed for time, if you don't have an appropriate time frame to really ask these questions, take time to listen to the child, then it's probably not going to be very productive, and the child is going to pick up on the fact that you're pressed for time. So maybe putting a pause to it, saying something like, let's talk about this when we get home, and then really following through with that promise. Not using the strategy when other people are around, especially other children or people that the child doesn't feel comfortable with, because they might feel embarrassed or they might feel like other people are watching them or judging them, and that's not going to help the conversation. When you yourself are upset or tired, if you don't think that you really have the time to be intentional about this conversation, that's okay. You are a human too. Again, just setting up a different time later on to talk about these things. And then lastly, when behavior is serious, sometimes children engage in behavior that might put them in danger. Maybe they're hitting somebody else, or maybe somebody else is hitting them. And so in that moment, you don't want to say, okay, let's talk about emotions while you're hitting each other. Maybe you take some time to make sure everybody's safe and then come back to have that conversation later on. Next slide, please, Morgan. So we've talked a lot about all kinds of interventions and strategies to working with children in the moment, but some general strategies to promote awareness just in everyday life can be things like talking about your own emotions. Like maybe you just finished watching a movie as a family or in a class, and you can say something like, I feel sad when the dog died in that movie. You don't have to say anything else, just normalize that you can talk about your feelings and that the emotion is there and maybe they're feeling it too. Sometimes I get angry when I'm driving. Again, just making use of that language so that they can watch you and you're modeling, expressing that emotion. Talking about the emotions of characters in books, TVs, and movies, especially that great example that Morgan shared with that movie Inside Out. A really great opportunity to talk about those emotions and kind of just watch them. And then providing material for the child to be around this language. So books, movies, TV, anything like that. That is all about strategies. And I believe Morgan has a little clip for us.
So before jumping into this, there are so many great resources out there. We have some listed on our resources slide. We used a book called Mindful Discipline and also a book called Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children and a couple other resources. And there's a lot of really great resources out there for caregivers and for other people who just work with children and adolescents. And one that I wanted to highlight today, many of you in the lab who are here today know Dr. Leanne Hawken, who used to be part of our lab. She has a long list of credentials. She was a professor at the University of Utah for a while and then had left to create some and start some other projects. And one project she is currently working on is called Parent Playbook. It's an online parenting platform for parents and caregivers. And she wasn't able to be here in person today, but we asked her and she was able to record a short little intro on what this resource is going to look like. And we wanted to share it with you all because I think it's a great resource that's going to be coming out for everyone. So it's a quick 3-minute clip of her just kind of introducing the general idea.
Hi, my name is Dr. Leanne Hawken, and I am Chief of Education and Content for Parent Playbook. We are building a parenting app so that parents can quickly find credible custom solutions to all of their parenting challenges. So Parent Playbook has 3 pillars: find, collaborate, and help. So find basically is search and social. Each parent will receive a customized news feed with relevant information for both them and each one of their children, and it's going to be powered by machine learning. They'll be able to search answers from parents as well as other professionals using an advanced search function and be able to ask questions and answers to both parents and professionals on the app. Collaborate involves saving and sharing content. So you can save your favorite content to your child's playbook or create custom playbooks. So if you have issues and want to focus on potty training, you can have a potty training playbook. You curate and share with other people in your community, your partner, spouse, grandparents, babysitters, and so forth, and then collaborate with others off the platform. The third pillar is access to professionals. So you'll be able to search our database for credentialed professionals. We'll provide a match that will best fit your family's needs, and then you can meet using our platform on the platform with video and direct message. So please, it is a free app for everybody, except for the part where you have access to professionals. That will involve a fee. And also, here are some real features. So please sign up on the waiting list at parentplaybook.com, and here's some features that we already have in place.
Available today. This is functionality available today for users on the platform. The user gets relevant custom news feeds for them and for each of their children according to the child's age, gender, and special needs. If they see content they like, They can save that content to their child in custom playbooks. The parent can also see profiles of family, friends, content creators on the platform and follow that person to get relevant content pushed to them from those people that they know, like, and trust. To bring content into Parent Playbook, users can be almost anywhere on the web and save content directly to Parent Playbook from the Share extension. That same content is also now available on the platform for everyone to find, save, and share. Users can even save content for later to read after they put the kids to bed. They can curate and save content from blogs, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, and TikTok. We release new features at least every 2 weeks, sometimes more often.
So thanks for listening about Parent Playbook, and please join the waitlist at parentplaybook.com. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, my name is Dr. Leanne Hawken, and I am Chief.
There we go. Okay, we're not going to have time for the breakout exercise, but just to wrap up with that video, yeah, it's going to be a really fantastic resource that's going to be available for parents and caregivers. It has experts in the mental health field as well as the behavior field, so you can find all kinds of awesome supports there. But just kind of to reiterate with what we talked about today, that these are some great tools that we have highlighted to kind of help children be more aware of their emotions and to develop that emotional awareness, which in turn will increase their emotional resiliency down the road. But also, parenting can be hard and messy, and even just working with children can be hard and messy. It's not always simple, and all you can do is to do your best to implement some of these strategies, but to also remember you don't have to be perfect and do it right every time. If we can just create more opportunities for children to engage with and be aware of their emotions, we are supporting them in the long term. So you don't have to be perfect. Just start incorporating a little bit at a time, and you will be supporting your children. So anything you want to add, Margarita, before we jump to questions?
I think you wrapped it up beautifully, Morgan. I think the point of our presentation is to provide some resources, but also highlight that everyone, not only the child, but also the caregiver, are humans. And as long as we're compassionate and empathetic, then that's what matters.
So any questions, or I'll turn it back over to Annie, I think is usually how it works.
Thank you, Morgan and Margarita, for a great presentation. Kind of like what Morgan said, we'll open it up to any questions or comments. So feel free to drop anything in the chat box or jump in if you're feeling brave.
I really enjoyed the presentation, to both of you. Especially, I loved how you broke down the validating not only emotions, but the content and meaning. I think that's really important. A lot of times working with students, I'm focused on the emotion and feelings, and sometimes I'll miss the meaning behind it. So I love the breakdown of those three.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with all of it, but it can be important to validate the emotion as well as just what they're saying sometimes, to let them know that we hear them. So thank you for your comment.
All right, I don't think we have any other questions or comments, in which case I think we can go ahead and conclude this webinar. One big virtual round of applause for our presenters today, Morgan and Margarita, on a great presentation. This presentation is recorded and will be published to the UTTEC Lab YouTube channel and website, which you can access by going to u-tteclab.com. Again, thank you all so much for joining us, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.